"Say your name," the elder ordered, his voice echoing across the stone hall like a verdict already decided. The slab at the center of the courtyard still held the faint carving of her name, the letters shallow but stubborn, as if even the stone had hesitated to let her go. Alara Whitmore stood barefoot on the cold surface, the chill biting into her skin, creeping up her spine in slow, deliberate waves, yet she did not move. Around her, the pack formed a wide circle, their cloaks brushing against one another, their whispers weaving into a low, suffocating hum that pressed against her ears. No one stepped forward. No one spoke her name. Above them, the gray morning sky stretched endlessly, dull and indifferent, as if the world itself had chosen not to witness what was about to happen. "Say it," the elder repeated, sharper this time, his hand tightening around the staff that marked his authority. Alara's throat tightened. She could feel the weight of every gaze, every judgment, every silent agreement that she did not belong. An Omega who could not fully shift, who carried no sense strong enough to be claimed, who existed in the margins of a world built on strength and dominance. She had always known this day would come. Still, knowing did nothing to soften it. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides, nails pressing into her palms, grounding herself in the small, private sensation of pain that no one else could see. The crowd shifted, a ripple of impatience. Somewhere to her left, a quiet laugh slipped free before being quickly stifled, but the damage was done. Heat rose to her cheeks, not from anger, not even from shame, but from the unbearable awareness of being seen only as something less. Her voice cracked before the word could fully form, and she swallowed hard, forcing air into lungs that felt too tight. She remembered her mother's voice then, soft and steady, saying her name as if it mattered, as if it held weight, as if it was something worth keeping. Alara Whitmore. The memory flickered, fragile and distant. "I am no one," she began again, the words heavy, foreign, settling on her tongue like ash. A murmur of approval moved through the crowd, subtle, but unmistakable, the kind of satisfaction that came from seeing order restored. The elder nodded once, as if the world had just righted itself. "Again," he said. Her chest tightened. Something inside her resisted, small but stubborn, refusing to fully break. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of pine and something colder, sharper, unfamiliar. Alara barely noticed it at first, too consumed by the pressure closing in around her, by the expectation that she would erase herself completely. She lowered her gaze to the carved letters beneath her feet, tracing them with her eyes as if memorizing them one last time. Her name, her only proof that she had ever been more than this moment. "Say it," the elder demanded. Alara inhaled slowly, the air trembling in her lungs, and for a brief second, the noise of the crowd faded, the world narrowing to the sound of her own heartbeat. Then, barely louder than a breath, she whispered, "Alara Whitmore." The words slipped out before she could stop them, fragile but undeniable. A sharp intake of breath rippled through the circle, followed by a sudden, heavy silence that felt different, thicker, as if something unseen had shifted. Alara's head lifted slightly, confusion flickering through her chest, and that was when she felt it. A presence, quiet but immense, standing just beyond the edge of the crowd, watching, waiting, as if her name had been a signal instead of a surrender. The silence did not break the way it should have, not with whispers or laughter or the elder's sharp rebuke, but with something heavier, something that settled over the courtyard like a storm that had not yet decided whether to reveal itself. Alara felt it before she saw it, a shift in the air that pressed gently against her skin, raising a faint chill along her arms despite the stillness of the morning. The elder's expression hardened, his gaze snapping toward the edge of the gathered pack as if he had sensed it too, though he said nothing at first. That hesitation alone was enough to send a ripple of unease through the crowd. Alara's heart began to pound, not with fear this time, but with a strange, unfamiliar awareness that she could not explain. The presence she had felt moments ago did not retreat. It drew closer. Slow, deliberate footsteps sounded against the stone, each one quiet yet impossible to ignore, the kind of sound that did not demand attention and yet claimed it entirely. Wolves shifted instinctively, bodies angling away to create space without being told, their earlier confidence dissolving into something more cautious, more uncertain. Alara lifted her head just enough to see past the line of shoulders, her breath catching as a figure emerged from the shadows at the edge of the courtyard. He did not rush. He did not announce himself. He simply walked forward, and somehow that was enough to command the entire space. His presence carried a weight that did not need explanation, something ancient and steady that made the very air feel denser, harder to breathe. The elder straightened, his grip tightening on his staff as recognition flickered across his face, followed by something that looked dangerously close to restraint. No one spoke the name, but everyone knew. Alara's pulse stuttered as the realization brushed against her thoughts, fragile and disbelieving. The Alpha King did not attend ceremonies like this. He did not involve himself in the quiet erasures of those deemed unworthy. And yet he was here. The figure stopped just beyond the circle, his gaze sweeping once across the gathered wolves before settling, unmistakably, on her. It was not a glance. It was not curiosity. It was recognition, sharp and immediate, as if her whispered name had reached him in a way no one else could understand. Alara felt it land on her like a physical thing, steady and unyielding, and for a moment she forgot how to breathe. The elder cleared his throat, forcing authority back into his voice. "This is not a matter that requires the crown," he said carefully, each word measured as if walking a narrow edge. "The pack has spoken." The man did not respond right away. He took one more step forward, crossing the invisible boundary that separated observer from participant, and the movement alone sent a subtle wave through the crowd as wolves lowered their gazes without thinking. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, controlled, carrying across the courtyard without effort. "The pack has forgotten something." The words were simple, but they settled into the silence with undeniable weight. Alara's chest tightened as she watched him, confusion and something dangerously close to hope stirring in equal measure. The elder frowned, clearly displeased, yet unwilling to challenge him outright. "And what would that be?" he asked, though the question lacked its earlier certainty. The Alpha King's gaze did not leave Alara, not even for a second. "Her name," he said, and this time, the silence that followed was absolute. The word lingered in the air as if it carried more than sound, as if it held weight that pressed against every chest in the courtyard, forcing breath to slow, forcing thought to pause. Alara felt it settle into her bones, unfamiliar and overwhelming. The simple acknowledgement of her name unraveling something tight and hidden deep inside her. No one moved. No one dared to interrupt. The elder's jaw tightened, his authority slipping in small, almost invisible fractures, and for the first time since the ceremony began, uncertainty crept into his stance. "Her name has been spoken," he replied, though his voice lacked the strength it had held before, as if he were trying to reclaim control that had already begun to shift. "And it has been relinquished." The Alpha King did not look at him. His attention remained fixed on Alara, unwavering, deliberate, as though the entire gathering had narrowed to her alone. That focus made her pulse race in a way she could not steady, each beat loud in her ears, each breath shallow and uneven. She wanted to look away, to shrink back into the quiet invisibility she had learned to survive within, but something held her in place, something stronger than fear. "Relinquished," he repeated, the word low, almost thoughtful, as if testing its meaning. Then, slowly, he stepped forward, closing the distance that no one else had ever crossed. The movement was not rushed, yet every eye followed it, every wolf instinctively aware that something irreversible was unfolding. Alara's fingers trembled at her sides, her body caught between the urge to retreat and the strange pull that kept her rooted where she stood. He stopped a few feet away from her, close enough that she could see the sharp lines of his expression, the calm intensity in his eyes that held neither pity nor judgment, only certainty. It unsettled her more than anything else. "Say it again," he said quietly. The request was directed at her, but it did not feel like a command. It felt like something else, something steadier, something that left no room for refusal and yet did not force compliance. Alara's throat tightened. The crowd shifted, tension rising again, not from cruelty this time, but from anticipation, from the fragile edge of something they did not understand. The elder took a step forward, his staff striking lightly against the stone. "This is unnecessary," he insisted, though his voice wavered. The ritual is complete. The Alpha King's gaze flicked toward him for the briefest second, and the elder fell silent without another word. Alara felt that shift as clearly as if it had been spoken aloud, the balance of power tilting in a way that could not be undone. Her breath came slow and unsteady as she looked down at the worn carving beneath her feet, the letters that had nearly been erased, the identity she had almost surrendered completely. Her name. It felt fragile now, like something that could vanish if she did not hold on to it tightly enough. She closed her eyes for a moment, drawing in a breath that trembled at the edges, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft but clearer than before. Alara Whitmore. The sound carried farther this time, no longer a whisper meant only for herself, but something that reached beyond her, something that existed in the space between her and the man standing before her. He did not hesitate. The moment her voice faded, he spoke, repeating the name with a steadiness that transformed it entirely. Alara Whitmore. It did not sound the same. In his voice, the name held weight, presence, something unyielding that settled into the silence like a promise waiting to be fulfilled. The air shifted again, subtle but undeniable, and Alara felt it brush against her skin like the first hint of warmth after a long, cold night. Something awakening, something that refused to be buried any longer. The name did not fade this time. It did not shrink back into silence or dissolve beneath the weight of judgment. It remained, steady and present, echoing softly in the stillness, as if the very air had decided to hold on to it. Alara felt it settle into her chest, not as something fragile anymore, but as something real, something that could not be taken from her so easily. Her breath caught, her fingers loosening slightly at her sides as warmth spread through her in a way she had never known before, quiet but undeniable. Around them, the pack stood frozen, their earlier certainty fractured, replaced by a tension that no one seemed willing to break. The elder shifted again, his discomfort now visible, his authority slipping further with each passing second. "This changes nothing," he said, though the words sounded thinner now, lacking the conviction they once carried. "A name spoken does not restore what has been judged." The Alpha King's gaze finally moved, slow and deliberate, meeting the elders with a calm that did not need to raise its voice to be understood. "Judged by whom?" he asked, the question simple yet heavy, settling into the space between them like a challenge that could not be ignored. The elder hesitated, just for a moment, and in that moment the answer became clear to everyone watching. The Alpha King turned his attention back to Alara, and the shift was immediate, as if the rest of the world had once again faded to the edges. He studied her not with curiosity, but with recognition that ran deeper than sight, something instinctive and unshaken by the opinions of others. Alara felt it again, that strange pull, stronger now, threading through her chest, steadying her heartbeat even as her thoughts struggled to keep pace. "Names are not given by the crowd," he continued, his voice quieter now, yet somehow reaching every corner of the courtyard. "They are carried, protected, and spoken with purpose." Each word seemed to settle into the ground beneath them, anchoring itself in a way that could not be undone. Alara swallowed, her throat still tight, but no longer from fear. "Alone." The elder opened his mouth as if to argue, then closed it again, the weight of the moment pressing down on him in a way that left no easy escape. The crowd remained silent, their attention fixed, their earlier whispers gone as if they had never existed. Alara shifted her weight slightly, the cold stone beneath her feet no longer biting as sharply as before, her focus drawn entirely to the man standing in front of her. She did not understand what was happening, not fully, but she could feel the change as clearly as she felt her own breath, the way the world seemed to tilt, aligning itself around something new. The Alpha King took another step closer, the distance between them narrowing until it felt almost unreal, as if she had stepped into a different moment entirely. He did not reach for her, did not touch her, yet his presence alone felt like something solid, something she could lean into if she allowed herself to. "Look at me," he said, and this time it was unmistakably a command, though it carried no harshness, only certainty. Alara hesitated for the briefest second, then lifted her gaze fully to meet his. The world seemed to quiet even further, the edges of her vision softening as everything narrowed to that single point of connection. For a heartbeat, Neither of them moved. Then, with the same steady calm, he spoke again, his voice low but resolute. Your name was not meant to be buried. The words settled into her like truth, simple and unshaken. And for the first time since the ceremony began, Alara felt something shift inside her, not breaking, but rising, something that had been pressed down for far too long finally finding the space to breathe. The words lingered between them, quiet but unyielding, and Alara felt them take root somewhere deep within her, somewhere she had forgotten existed, a place untouched by years of silence and dismissal. Her breath trembled as she held his gaze, the weight of his certainty pressing against the fragile walls she had built around herself for so long. It was not overwhelming, not crushing, but steady, patient, as if it would remain no matter how long it took her to believe it. Around them, the stillness, stretched, thick with unspoken tension. No one moved. No one dared to interrupt what was unfolding. The elder's grip tightened on his staff, the faint scrape of wood against stone breaking the silence for a brief moment before it was swallowed again by the quiet. You speak as though her name carries authority, he said, his voice careful now, restrained, but edged with something sharper beneath the surface. But she has no place here. The Alpha King did not react immediately. He let the words settle, let them exist in the open air where everyone could hear them, where their meaning could not be softened or hidden. Then, slowly, he shifted his stance, not away from Alara, but slightly forward, placing himself just enough between her and the rest of the pack that the change was unmistakable. It was not aggressive. It was not forceful, but it was deliberate. Alara felt it as clearly as if it had been spoken aloud, that subtle repositioning that altered everything without a single raised voice. Her pulse quickened, her body reacting before her thoughts could catch up, a strange sense of safety threading through her chest, unfamiliar and almost disorienting. She had never stood behind someone like this, never felt the quiet assurance of being shielded without being diminished. Place is not decided by comfort, he replied at last, his voice low and even, carrying across the courtyard with effortless clarity. It is decided by truth. The elder's expression tightened, his composure slipping further as murmurs began to stir at the edges of the crowd, uncertain and hesitant, as if the pack itself no longer stood on solid ground. Alara's gaze flickered briefly to the faces around her, the same wolves who had watched her in silence, who had agreed without question that she should disappear. Now, their expressions were different, less certain, less unified, as if doubt had found its way into the cracks. She turned her attention back to the man in front of her, her breath still uneven, her thoughts still struggling to keep pace with the shift unfolding around her. Why? She managed to whisper, the words slipping out before she could stop it, soft but clear in the quiet. It was not defiance. It was not disbelief. It was something simpler, more honest. Why her? Why now? The Alpha King's gaze softened just enough to be noticeable, though the strength behind it did not waver. For a moment, he did not answer, as if considering the question not as a challenge, but as something worth acknowledging fully. Because you did not forget it, he said finally. Alara blinked, her brows drawing together slightly, confusion flickering across her features. Your name, he clarified, his voice steady, each word measured. They asked you to let it go, to become nothing, and you did not. The truth of it struck her with quiet force, not as something dramatic, but as something deeply personal, something she had not realized mattered until this moment. Her chest tightened, her fingers curling again at her sides, not from fear this time, but from the weight of being seen in a way she had never experienced before. The crowd shifted again, the tension no longer sharp but uncertain, as if the story they believed had already begun to unravel. The Alpha King held her gaze for another heartbeat, then turned slightly, his attention expanding once more to include the entire pack. A name that refuses to disappear, he said, his voice carrying farther now, stronger, is not one meant to be erased. The words settled over the courtyard like something final, something that could not easily be undone, and Alara felt the echo of them linger inside her, steady and growing, as if the space she had been forced to shrink into was finally beginning to open again. The courtyard did not return to what it had been, not after those words, not after the quiet certainty that now lingered in every corner of the space, like something alive and watching. Alara could feel it in the way the air pressed differently against her skin, in the way the silence no longer felt like suffocation, but like anticipation, as if the world itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Her breath steadied slowly, each inhale deeper than the last, her chest no longer tight with the need to disappear. For the first time, she did not feel small. The elder shifted again, his unease now impossible to hide, his authority slipping further with every passing moment that remained beyond his control. "You speak of truth," he said, his voice measured but strained. "Yet the pack has already determined her place. She cannot fulfill the role expected of her kind. She does not belong." The words hung there, heavier now, not because they carried more power, but because they no longer felt unquestionable. A faint murmur followed, uncertain, fractured, as if the unity that once defined the pack had begun to break apart. Alara felt the old instinct rise for a brief second, the familiar urge to shrink, to accept what was said simply because it had always been said. But it did not take hold the way it once would have. Something inside her resisted now, quiet but firm, echoing the words that had been spoken for her, about her, as if they had given shape to something she had never been allowed to name. The Alpha King did not turn fully toward the elder this time. Instead, he remained where he stood, his presence steady, his focus split between Alara and the crowd that watched in growing uncertainty. "Belonging is not decided by expectation," he replied, his voice calm, carrying without effort. "It is revealed." The simplicity of it made it harder to argue, harder to dismiss. The elder opened his mouth again, then hesitated, his gaze flickering across the gathered wolves as if searching for the support that had once come so easily. But it was not there in the same way. Doubt had taken its place, quiet but undeniable. Alara's heartbeat slowed, no longer racing with fear, but steady, grounded, as if each word spoken had anchored her more firmly in the moment. She became aware of the ground beneath her feet again, the cool stone no longer biting but solid, real, something she stood on instead of something she endured. The Alpha King's gaze returned fully to her, and there was something new in it now, not just recognition, but a kind of expectation, as if he were not only speaking for her, but waiting for her to stand within what he had made possible. "Alara Whitmore," he said again, her name clear and unwavering, and this time it did not feel like something given to her, but something reflected back, something she already carried. Her breath caught, then steadied, her shoulders lifting slightly as if the weight she had been carrying had shifted, not gone, but no longer pressing her down. She did not look away. She did not lower her gaze. Around them, the pack remained silent, watching, listening, as if witnessing something they did not fully understand but could not ignore. The elder took a step back, subtle but significant, the movement small yet undeniable in its meaning. The balance had changed, not through force, not through command, but through something quieter and far more difficult to resist. Alara felt it settle into her bones, that shift, that undeniable sense that the story she had been living inside was no longer fixed, no longer decided for her without question. The Alpha King's voice came once more, steady and certain, carrying across the courtyard as if sealing something unseen into place. "If her name remains," he said, his gaze sweeping briefly across the pack before returning to her, "then so does her place." The words did not echo loudly, they did not demand attention, but they held, firm and unshaken, and Alara felt them settle inside her like something that would not fade, something that would remain long after the silence finally broke. The shift did not end with his words. It deepened, spreading through the courtyard in a way that no one could deny, not even those who had stood moments ago so certain of what Alara was supposed to be. She felt it in the way the eyes around her no longer dismissed her, in the way the silence now carried weight instead of absence, as if every wolf present had been forced to reconsider something they had never questioned before. Her heartbeat remained steady, grounded in a way that felt unfamiliar yet right, as though something long buried within her had finally been allowed to surface. The elder stood rigid, his posture caught between resistance and restraint, his authority no longer absolute, but not yet surrendered. "This is not how order is maintained," he said, quieter now, as if the words themselves no longer carried the same certainty. "If we allow one exception, the structure begins to fail." The Alpha King did not move, but there was a subtle shift in his presence, something that settled deeper, firmer, as if the ground itself had aligned with him. "It is not an exception," he replied, his voice calm, unwavering. "It is a correction." The word landed with quiet finality, and the ripple it caused was immediate, a subtle intake of breath moving through the crowd, as if something had been spoken that could not be taken back. Alara felt it too, the way that single word reframed everything, not as rebellion, not as disruption, but as truth being restored to where it had always belonged. Her fingers relaxed fully at her sides, the tension she had carried for so long easing in a way she had never experienced before. She was still standing in the same place, still surrounded by the same wolves, but nothing felt the same. A movement near the edge of the crowd caught her attention, small but noticeable, as a young wolf, barely more than a teenager, shifted forward slightly, his expression uncertain but no longer closed. He glanced at her, then away, then back again, as if seeing her for the first time without the weight of expectation. It was subtle, almost nothing, but it mattered. The Alpha King's gaze moved briefly across the crowd, not in challenge, but in quiet acknowledgement, as if he had noticed the same shift. "Say her name," he said, his voice steady, directed not at Alara this time, but at them. The command did not rise in volume, yet it carried more authority than anything spoken before. The courtyard held its breath. No one moved at first. The elder remained silent, his expression unreadable, as if he understood that this moment would define more than just a single ceremony. Alara felt her chest tighten again, not with fear, but with anticipation, with something fragile and uncertain that trembled at the edges of her awareness. She did not look away. She did not lower her gaze. She stood exactly where she was, her feet firm against the stone, her name no longer something she whispered only to herself. The young wolf near the edge shifted again, his voice hesitant but clear enough to carry. "Alara, Whitmore." The sound was uneven, uncertain, but it was real. It broke the silence in a way that felt different from before, not sharp or cruel, but tentative, searching. Another voice followed, softer, then another, each one adding to the first, building slowly, unevenly, until the name began to take shape again in the air, no longer isolated, no longer fragile. Alara felt it like warmth spreading through her chest, each repetition strengthening something inside her that had once been on the verge of disappearing entirely. She drew in a breath, deeper than any before, her shoulders lifting as if the weight she had carried for so long had finally begun to lift. The Alpha King did not interrupt, did not rush the moment, allowing it to unfold on its own, allowing the pack to speak what they had once tried to erase. And as the sound of her name grew steadier, more certain, Alara realized that it no longer belonged to the silence. It no longer belonged to shame. It existed now in the open, carried by voices that could not pretend it had never been there. The sound of her name did not fade this time. It grew, steady and undeniable, carried from one voice to another until it filled the courtyard in a way that no silence could reclaim. Alara stood in the center of it, her breath catching as each repetition settled deeper into her chest, not as something fragile, but as something restored, something that had always belonged to her even when no one else had acknowledged it. The air felt different now, lighter yet more charged, as if the space itself had shifted to make room for something long denied. She could feel it in the way her shoulders no longer curved inward, in the way her stance held without effort, grounded and certain in a way she had never known before. Around her, the pack no longer looked like a single, unified force. Their expressions had changed, some uncertain, some thoughtful, some still resistant, but none untouched. The elder remained where he stood, his authority quieted, not by force, but by the undeniable shift that had taken place before him. His gaze moved across the gathered wolves, then back to Alara, as if seeing her through a lens that had only just been cleared. The Alpha King did not speak immediately. He allowed the moment to settle, to fully take shape, his presence steady and unyielding as he stood beside her, not in front of her, not above her, but aligned with her in a way that felt intentional, deliberate. Alara noticed it, that subtle change, the way he no longer stood between her and the world, but beside her within it, as if the space she occupied was no longer something to be shielded, but something to be recognized. The voices gradually quieted, the echo of her name lingering softly in the air like the last note of a song that refused to disappear entirely. Alara inhaled slowly, the breath steady, full, her chest rising without the familiar tightness that had once defined every movement. She felt seen, not in the way that exposed her, but in the way that acknowledged her, allowed her to exist fully without question. The Alpha King turned his head slightly, his gaze sweeping once more across the pack, not searching, not demanding, but acknowledging the shift that had taken place. "Remember it," he said, his voice calm, carrying with quiet authority. "Not because I spoke it, because it was never yours to erase." The words settled into the silence that followed, not heavy, not forceful, but permanent. Alara felt them anchor within her, not as something external, but as something that belonged to her just as much as her name did. The elder lowered his staff slightly, the movement small but significant, his posture no longer rigid, no longer resisting what had already been made clear. He did not argue again. He did not attempt to reclaim what had been lost. Instead, he inclined his head, just barely, a gesture so subtle it might have gone unnoticed if not for the weight it carried. Alara saw it, felt it, the acknowledgement not just of the Alpha King's authority, but of her presence within that authority. It was not an apology. It was not redemption, but it was a beginning. A breeze moved through the courtyard, soft and cool, brushing against Alara's skin, lifting a strand of her hair as if marking the moment in a way words could not. She closed her eyes for a brief second, letting it pass through her, grounding herself in the reality of what had just happened. When she opened them again, the world felt different, not changed beyond recognition, but shifted just enough to allow something new to exist within it. The Alpha King glanced at her once more, his expression steady, unreadable to anyone else. But to her, it carried something quiet and certain, something that did not need to be spoken aloud. Alara Whitmore. Her name remained, not as a whisper, not as a defiance, but as truth, carried openly in a world that had finally been forced to hear it. The courtyard did not return to noise, not fully, not the careless kind that had filled it before, but a quieter presence began to take its place, something steadier, something aware. Alara remained where she stood, her feet still on the cold stone, yet it no longer felt like a place of judgment, no longer something meant to hold her down. It felt like ground she stood on, something that supported her instead of defining her limits. Her breath moved evenly now, her chest rising and falling without strain, each inhale carrying a clarity she had never known before. Around her, the pack shifted slowly, not in unison, not with certainty, but with a subtle understanding that something had changed in a way that could not be undone. Some wolves lowered their gazes, not in dismissal, but in thought, while others looked at her directly, no longer avoiding her presence as if it were something inconvenient. The elder stepped back fully this time, the distance small but meaningful, his staff no longer marking control, but simply something he held. His silence remained, not empty, but acknowledging, as if he had recognized that the moment no longer belonged to him. The Alpha King did not rush to fill the space. He allowed it to exist, to settle, to become real in the minds of those who had witnessed it. Alara felt his presence beside her, not overwhelming, not demanding, but constant, like something she could rely on without needing to question it. She turned her head slightly, just enough to glance at him, and for a brief moment, their eyes met again. There was no command there now, no challenge, only a quiet certainty that did not need to be spoken aloud. He had said what needed to be said. The rest was hers. Alara drew in a slow breath, the air cool against her lungs, steady and grounding, and for the first time, she allowed herself to stand fully within the space that had been given back to her. Not borrowed, not protected, but restored. Her name was not something fragile anymore. It did not tremble at the edges of silence. It existed, clear and unbroken, carried not only by her voice, but by the acknowledgement of those who had once denied it. She looked out across the courtyard, her gaze no longer lowered, no longer searching for permission to exist. The wolves who met her eyes did not look away as quickly as before. Some held her gaze for a moment longer than expected, as if adjusting to something new, something they had not known how to see until now. The breeze moved again, light and steady, brushing across the stone and through the gathered crowd, carrying with it the faint scent of pine and something sharper, cleaner, like the beginning of a season that had yet to fully arrive. Alara felt it pass through her, not as a reminder of what she had endured, but as something that marked what came next. The Alpha King stepped forward then, not away from her, but slightly ahead, his presence shifting just enough to signal movement, to indicate that the moment had reached its natural end. He did not look back immediately, but his voice carried quietly, meant for her alone, though it settled into the air with the same certainty as before. "Walk with your name," he said, simple and unwavering. Alara felt the words settle inside her, not as instruction, but as permission, as something she could carry forward without question. She did not hesitate this time. She stepped off the stone, her bare feet meeting the ground beyond it, and the movement felt small, almost insignificant, yet it changed everything. No one stopped her. No one